Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, September 7th, 2023, and we are here at the Transportation Commission meeting. This is a hybrid meeting, and we are joined in person and online. My name is Bridget Obikoya, and I am the Transportation Liaison to the Transportation Commission. This meeting is being recorded, so please turn off your mics on Teams if you are not speaking. Before we start with the agenda items, are there any citizen comments on matters that are not on the agenda? Hearing none, I'll turn it over to Chairman Slatt for our first agenda item.
Great. I will just preface this first agenda item, which is election of a vice chair for the commission. The Transportation Commission has not had a vice chair in any of the time that I've been on the commission, which is a very long time. But it is in our charter that we have the opportunity to have one. And I did want to share with the commission that I have an upcoming end date. Probably about a year or slightly less than a year from now, I will fall off of the commission. It has been an extremely long run. I am been on here for more than 10 years at this point. And it is time to let some other folks have a leadership role and whatnot. So in the interest of doing better succession planning than the chairs who were chairs before who left no indication whatsoever who might be chair after they left. I think Commissioner Muradovic has been doing an absolutely bang-up job. He has some great institutional knowledge, having been here for several years already. And if he were to be appointed chair next July, when that comes back around again, I think he would do a fantastic job. So I would love to see him on here as vice chair. So that I can start passing along some of the knowledge of what it is that the chair does, which is primarily writing letters and talking with Ms. Obikoya about the agenda. So with that said, I think I will go ahead and make a motion, which is that the Transportation Commission elect Commissioner Muradovic as vice chair of the commission.
I'll second.
That's been seconded. Is there any discussion? All right, then we will move to a vote. Commissioner Coleman.
Aye.
Commissioner Justin, I can't remember your last name. I'm so sorry. Furman.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Hussein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Muradovic.
I don't have a microphone.
Oh. That's going to be a problem.
Aye.
Let's see, is Commissioner Yeri online with us? Yes, Commissioner Yeri?
Aye.
That was a yes. Commissioner Shannon?
Aye.
I will vote yes. Commissioner Theo?
Aye.
And Commissioner Walker, are you interested in voting on Commissioner Muradovic as vice chair of the commission? Excellent. Great, then that passes unanimously. It is a pleasure to have you aboard, Commissioner Muradovic. And my troubles here calling the vote has made me realize that I skipped over another important thing at the beginning of this meeting, which is that we have a new commissioner on the commission. Commissioner Furman, would you like to introduce yourself briefly to the rest of the commission?
Yep, my name is Justin Furman, and I'm really happy to be joining you all. So thanks for having me.
All right, and with that, Ms. Obikoya, whenever you're ready for the next agenda item.
Okay. The next agenda item is an ordinance to vacate a portion of South Walter Reed Drive adjacent to lots 94 and 95, Arlington Plateau, being part of the property known as the Arlington Career Center, owned by Arlington County School Board, 816 South Walter Reed Drive, Arlington, Virginia, RPC 25014-004 and 25014-010 with conditions. And I'll turn it over to staff member Mike Kaluski.
Thank you, Ms. Obakoya. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Michael Haluski. I'm a real estate specialist with the Department of Environmental Services, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Betsy Herbst, who is participating virtually. She's also a real estate specialist with the Department of Environmental Services. Here tonight to present an ordinance of vacation, a small portion. It's about 131 square feet of South Walter Reed Drive. This is associated with the Arlington Career Center site. You're probably familiar with this. This is a use permit and the vacation of 8th Street that you heard back at your May meeting. So this is a small sliver. It's a new request from Arlington Public Schools. This is an additional vacation area behind the back of the sidewalk along the frontage of Walter Reed to help facilitate the construction of the new Arlington Career Center. This is coming now as opposed to with that use permit and the 8th Street vacation that was approved by the board in June. Just because of a timing issue. This was something that was known about then, but the development of the plats and those types of things were taking a bit longer. So, like I mentioned, this will facilitate the construction of the new Arlington Career Center building. This section of South Walter Reed was originally dedicated in 1923 as Bingham Road, which was then later renamed to South Fillmore Street and then eventually to South Walter Reed Drive. This particular portion of South Walter Reed Drive is designated as a Type C arterial street on the Master Transportation Plan. Physically, the area that's to be vacated, it's a triangle at its base is only 3 feet deep. It's about 88 feet long. It's just a grassy area behind the back of sidewalk. It's not being used for any public street or utilities currently. And there is also an adjacent area, what we'll see on the next map, that is proposed to be dedicated to the county by APS. So this is a little small, but it's a very small area. It's 131 square foot sliver right there, and that just sort of brings that right-of-way line right to the back of the sidewalk. And then this is the area that APS currently owns that would be dedicated in fee to the county. Here's a vicinity map that shows the overall site area and this small little sliver. So staff recommends to the Transportation Commission that they find that the proposed vacation of a portion of South Walter Reed Drive adjacent to lots 94 and 95, Arlington Plateau, originally Bingham Road and South Fillmore Street, located between 7th and 8th Street South, is consistent with the Master Transportation Plan. That concludes our presentation, but Ms. Herbst and I are certainly happy to address any questions that the commissioners may have.
Great, thank you very much. This seems pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any questions? Seeing none, I move that the Transportation Commission finds that the proposed vacation of a portion of South Walter Reed Drive adjacent to lots 94 and 95 Arlington Plateau, originally Bingham Road and South Fillmore Street, located between 7th and 8th Street South, is consistent with the Master Transportation Plan. Anybody want to second that?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. Any discussion? All right, then we'll go to a vote. Commissioner Coleman.
Aye.
Commissioner Furman.
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Locker.
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Muradovic.
Aye.
Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon.
Aye.
Commissioner Theo.
Aye.
And I too will vote yes. I don't believe Commissioner Terry has joined us.
I'm right here.
Yes, you did. Commissioner Terry.
Aye.
Gang's all here. All right. With that, it passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the FY 27-28 Virginia Department of Transportation Revenue Sharing Grant Applications, and it's an action item. And we have staff member Dan Muller joining us for this item.
Hello, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, as always. I am here to ask for the Commission's endorsement of our every 2 years request to the VDOT revenue sharing program. I was here in May to give you a preliminary briefing on this very proposal. Now I'm here asking for the Commission's formal recommendation to the County Board that we do indeed have permission to submit these grants, these grant requests, I should say. So just some quick reminders about how this program works. This is a VDOT program, which is an important distinction because most of the grants we apply for are federal. That makes projects through this grant a little bit easier to work through the process. There's no inherent NEPA requirement, for example. This is for FY 27 and 28. That's right, 27 and 28. We're looking at some out years here. They do like to program these monies in advance. So this program provides a 50-50 funding split to localities for road projects. We provide $1, the state provides $1. Localities can apply for up to $10 million per 2-year cycle, but rarely receive that much funding per actual award. Individual projects cannot receive more than $10 million over the lifetime of that project. So there's some caps on what you can apply for. The state, as I said, sort of envisions revenue sharing as a road building program, I should say. Transit isn't eligible. Bike and ped projects can be eligible. They're not typically what VDOT is looking for, but we often try them anyway, sometimes with success. VDOT gives top priority in this program to projects that have already won revenue sharing awards in previous cycles. So if you need a little bit more money, you apply again. That's their highest priority. Second priority goes to projects that accelerate a project that's in a locality's CIP. Third priority goes to resurfacing or rehabilitation projects. Fourth priority goes to anything else that's eligible. Virtually never do they actually get to funding third or fourth priority projects. They typically fund priority 1 projects, those that were already in the revenue sharing system, pretty well. Priority 2 projects, very iffy. Sometimes you get some money, sometimes you don't. And then, as I said, the third and fourth priorities rarely receive any funding at all. Applications are due October 2nd. So when I briefed you in May, I discussed 3 pre-applications that staff was developing at the time. Just to remind you, those 3 pre-applications were Fort Myer Drive 2-way conversion in Roslyn, the North Sycamore Street improvements near East Falls Church Metro, and Arlington Boulevard Trail segment between George Mason and Glebe Road on the south side. Following the TC briefing in May, we submitted the 3 pre-applications. Now we're preparing the 3 formal final applications for, wait for the big surprise, the big unveiling of the projects. There are 3 of them. They're the Fort Myer Drive 2-way conversion, the North Sycamore Street improvements, and the Arlington Boulevard Trail between George Mason and Glebe Road. I'll be happy to tell you just a little bit about all those projects. I told you about them in May, but I'll be happy to refresh your memories. The Fort Myer Drive 2-way conversion is the project to remove the tunnel on Fort Myer Drive behind Roslyn Metro, make that street at grade and 2-way. This project did receive revenue sharing funding in a previous cycle, but not quite up to the maximum 10 million allowed. So basically, we'd like to go ahead and submit to the remaining approximately 1.9 million that would take us up to that maximum 10 million for the lifetime of the project. So that's the first one. Second one, North Sycamore Street Complete Street Project. We'd like to apply for about $2.5 million. This is another one that has received revenue sharing money in the past. It was a few years ago. This would improve the bike lanes and crosswalks right outside East Falls Church Metro. And again, this received revenue sharing funding in a previous cycle, so we think it's got a pretty good chance now. The third project, that Arlington Boulevard Trail between George Mason and Glebe, that's a new project. It's not already in the revenue sharing system. We're asking for about $4 million, up to about $4 million, to basically install a new trail on the south side of Route 50, right near the Arlington Hall Federal Center. So obviously, this would be another incremental improvement to the county's trail network. This was recommended in the Arlington Boulevard Trail feasibility study from earlier this year. and Arlington Hall is receptive to it. So we think it's a good opportunity and a good time to go ahead and get money to do it. Together, the three projects put us close to the 10 million max allowed per cycle. I think it's about a little more than 8.5 million, about 8.5 million. And although it's not quite at the max, that is more than we generally receive in any given cycle. I would anticipate we have a pretty good chance of the first two getting funded fully, and that third one, if I were going to guess, I would say they'd probably partially fund it. Just knowing the history of the program and how much money they tend to fund things with. So we would like to go ahead and advance these submissions to VDOT. And with that, I'll take any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Malouf. Do any commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Hussein, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just a quick, more of a clarification, really. You mentioned that the revenue sharing does not include transit. Do you mind explaining why that is? Like, what is, you said it's just for roads and not transit. I'm just wondering why that is.
You know, that's a state decision. That's just the way they've defined the project. It's a VDOT program, excuse me, the program, not the project. It's a VDOT led program. So typically transit is handled by DRPT. A lot of the multimodal grants that the state of Virginia, I should say the Commonwealth of Virginia, runs are handled through not VDOT. They're handled through the Virginia Office of Intermodal. Boy, I can't remember the exact title of it. I mean, that's a little embarrassing. It's anyway, it's a different office. So the fact that this is handled strictly by VDOT means that it is strictly following VDOT's priorities, and they view transit as just a different department. So that's how the state has defined this. We really have no choice but to follow their guidelines.
Any other questions? I know this is like the second time we've seen this, so we got a lot of our questions out last time. All right, great. I think these were great projects the first time around. They're great projects now, and even if we only get partial funding for the trail, that puts it priority one next time around if we have to go in again. So that would be fantastic. So seeing no other hands online or in person, I'm going to go ahead and move that. Where'd it go? Move that the Transportation Commission recommended that the County Board adopt the attached resolution authorizing Arlington County's participation in VDOT's FY27, FY28 revenue sharing program, applying for funding for the Fort Myer Drive two-way conversion, North Sycamore Street improvements, and Arlington Boulevard Trail South Side project. Seconded by Commissioner Locker. Any discussion of the motion? Seeing none, we will move to a vote. Commissioner Coleman.
Aye.
Commissioner Furman.
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Locker.
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Muradovic.
Aye.
Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon.
Aye.
Commissioner Terry.
Aye.
Commissioner Theo.
Aye.
And I too will vote yes. 12-0, unanimous. Thank you very much, Mr. Malouf.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is Bingham Center, and this is an action item with staff member Robert Gibson for the site plan. Okay. Just 1 second.
We're too efficient for our own good.
Got it. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry. You guys went much quicker than I anticipated, so thank you for your brevity. I'll try to be equally as brief if I can. But I'm Dave Tarter. I'm an attorney with Tardinova Law, and I represent the developer of the Bingham Center site. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the project and turn it over to my colleague, Dan Van Pelt, who's going to go in a little more detail about the transportation aspects of the project. You're probably familiar with the site. I'm going to go to the next slide. It's in Clarendon Circle, right in the heart of Clarendon, which is currently has the Silver Diner site and the beer lot and a few other odds and end buildings that you're probably familiar with. It's actually part of a fairly complicated consolidation and land swap to come out with the Joyce Motors site, which you saw several months ago, and our site, which is shown in yellow. It's a bit challenging site. As you can see, it's essentially two triangles stuck together, which has presented some challenges for us as a development team, but we think we've overcome them and put together a really exciting project. Next slide. From a transportation perspective, this project is kind of 1950s suburbia. Lots of asphalt, lots of curb cut, not that much sidewalk, no streetscape, no street trees. Really just kind of what you'd expect in the old days where you drive across the street because that was the only way to get there in a safe fashion. So let's go on to the next couple of slides. We've got more pictures around the site. You're probably familiar with it, but it is, as I explained, a very old-fashioned, car-centric, asphalt-centric site that we're going to transform, I think, into a very exciting place from a transportation perspective. Next slide. One more. So one thing I did want to mention is because you probably know the buildings are right on the street along this site, there's very little sidewalk. So to meet county expectations as to streetscape, sidewalk, and things like that, a pretty significant amount of our project is being actually dedicated or used for transportation purposes already. So we're losing something like more than a third of our site to expanding sidewalks, adding a new 10th Road North, and other things along the periphery of our site, which makes it even more challenging, frankly, to do all we're doing there. But after several years of work, COVID and other things, we think we're ready right now. Let me go on and show you just a few images around the site, and I'm going to turn it over to Dan. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial view from 10th Street. This is our multifamily residential building that tapers up from 10th Street as prescribed in the sector plan. Let's take a round. Let's keep going. So again, this is the hotel on the north tip. This would be where you've been looking at the Silver Diner. This is going to be a hotel, the only one in Clarendon. Very high-end hotel, 4-star hotel is what's anticipated, which we think is going to be really exciting for the community and the neighborhood as a whole. Next slide. This is the tip, the other tip, the intersection of Wilson and 10th Street. Again, a multifamily building, masonry, ground floor retail around the periphery of the site. Next slide. This is our ground floor. We spent an awful lot of time. We don't have 4 sides. We have 3 sides. There's no back door to this building. And so we've spent many, many months working with staff to come up with appropriate locations for loading dock and things like that, which frankly are challenging, as I said, on a triangular shape that's pretty tight to start with. So we think we've worked through all the issues. We're very happy with the way things have come out, and we would be happy to share additional details if you're interested in knowing the particulars of our ground floor use, but that's the ground floor of the hotel. Next slide. This is a little bit layout of our streets and the new 10th Road, as I mentioned, a new alley as well to service our building and the Joyce Motors site. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Dan Van Pelt.
Yeah, and I think if it's okay with the commission, I'm just going to stay here because I'm driving the presentation and it takes all my coordination and all my skill. So good evening again, Dan Van Pelt with Grove Slade. We did the transportation review and have been working with the team on this project and throughout its evolution. I think one of the things that's great about this site is it's well suited for walkability. We're very close to the Clarendon Metro Station. We have a number of bus routes. Many of the sidewalks meet county requirements, but what this project is going to be doing is greatly enhancing the character, especially of this block, both from a pedestrian standpoint, but also from a porosity standpoint. And so it's going to be a great attribute to the neighborhood. Gets a walk score even today of 93. And I think that's also because there's a number of destinations, retail and otherwise, that are easily walkable from the site. Moving on to the bike facilities, there are bike lanes on Fairfax, Clarendon, Wilson, Kirkwood. There are also shared bike lanes on Jackson and Monroe. There's at least 3 capital bike share stations in a quarter of a mile. And there's another number of planned bike improvements in the neighborhood that will serve the site and the greater neighborhood. Now going to the site level and speaking to bike parking, the project will meet the county's requirements for long-term and short-term bicycle spaces. The residential long-term bike spaces will be located on the ground level with access to amenities. So cyclists residents with bikes will just be able to roll right in off of the alley, which is a really nice feature to have. The hotel bicycle parking will be on the P1 level below the hotel. That will be accessed from 10th Road. And then we will have short-term bike spaces around the site. Moving on to transit, there are 8 bus stops in a quarter mile. There are 7 bus routes, and those are all shown on the figure to the right on this slide, and very easy access to the Clarendon Metro Station with Orange and Silver Line service. Now going down to site circulation, access to the parking garage, there'll be from one point on the new north-south alley. That will serve the entirety of the parking garage underneath of both of these buildings. For access to the residential building from a pedestrian standpoint, there'll be access off of Wilson Boulevard and 10th Street. The loading access will be off of the new alley. And we talked about the ground floor bike room already just a bit ago about that will have access right off of the alley to be able to roll right in. The primary pedestrian access points for the hotel, along with the primary access for the hotel itself, really is going to be Wilson Boulevard. There'll be secondary access point off of 10th Road, and bike parking, again, will be accessed off of 10th Road. The loading has been moved to 10th Road, and it will now occur in there on that point for the hotel. And then in the future, we don't have the retail program fully determined at this point in time, but you can see all the green spaces are retail, and there'll be access to those retail tenants as appropriate, helping activate those sides of the project. Moving into parking, vehicular parking, 0.7 spaces per dwelling unit, 1 per 580 for on the retail, and the hotel will be parked at 0.34 spaces per guest room. There'll be 13 EV spaces delivered with the project at the very beginning, and then there'll be 48 spaces that'll be made EV ready. And those are shown on the figure to the right. And I also would point out the green box is where the hotel long-term parking will be located on the P1 level. We have the street sections here. We're not going to go through those in detail, but on this slide, the next slide, and be happy to answer any questions about those street sections. And I think we have Bowman on the meeting with us too, can help answer any questions you might have, this site civil. There was a multimodal transportation assessment that was performed for this project. We looked at 12 intersections, and that scope was determined working with staff. We found 2 locations where there were mitigations were needed. Signal timings addressed those mitigations. And we think through the enhanced site design that will be delivered with this project and the implementation of a transportation management plan that will also mitigate site-related impacts. The TMP will include the 4 primary elements that are located here on the slide, and the details of those are contained in the site plan conditions. And with that, I think it concludes our presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Gibson, do you also have a presentation for us?
I do. Give me one moment. Let me try to get technology in the room working correctly. Okay. Some just very technical details. This is site plan 467 at 3200 Wilson Boulevard. Tonight, there are 2 elements associated with this hearing. The first element, which I'll be presenting in reverse order, is the vacation elements associated with existing public alleys on the property. And the second is the overall site plan, which was well described by the applicant earlier. I'm going to provide some additional review for consideration. This is the this is a good image of the site location. It's basically 2/3 of the triangular site bound by Wilson Boulevard, 10th Street, and North Irving Street, with a little bit of Washington Boulevard to the very north tip of the project. The southeast corner of the site, or of the overall block, is the Joyce Motors site, which was previously approved. So these two projects dovetail to add a number of transportation facilities and round out the pedestrian and street improvements around the entire block, along with providing a series of public open space improvements that we'll discuss. As the applicant described, there are two main towers above a unified 2.5-story parking garage. The north tower is the hotel. That's proposed at 10 stories with 229 rooms, a 0.35 parking space ratio per room. There's ground floor retail, principally hotel, but also cafe space there. And then there's penthouse amenity space. Additionally, the residential building, the south tower, is proposed as 11 stories with 290 units in total and a 0.7 parking ratio with ground floor retail. The project is proposed at LEED Gold. To achieve the bonus density associated with the project, there are a number of community benefits incorporated into the project, including 15 on-site committed affordable units with 10 family-sized units in the residential building. The provision and build out of the new 10th Road North, which will be a public street, and then the provision of the private alley that will support the garage access and loading for both the Joyce Motors project and this project. There are additional off-site transportation improvements that we'll go into detail about, and there are additional off-site open space improvements that the project will design and construct. The applicants provide a nice summary of the ground floor uses, but I think it should not be lost that a triangular site with two triangular buildings does make for interesting ground floor layout. They have done it very well, in many cases underpinned by the planning efforts of the sector plan that was recently approved. One major change since this was before SPRC is the relocation of the loading dock, which was previously proposed to have access off of North Irving Street. That has been moved around the corner to have access off of the new 10th Road. And the ground floor facade along North Irving has been, the transparency there has been improved since the last SPRC meeting. Generally bringing this project well in compliance with the sector plan. Additionally, the south tower, the residential tower, has substantial amounts of ground floor retail. There is a ground floor bike room, as the applicant talked about, to help support the multimodal nature of residents in the new project. The parking for the project is provided in a single below-grade garage with a single access point off of the alley. It is quite interesting shaped. And effectively, the hotel will have 88 parking spaces associated with the project. That's a 0.35 parking ratio. Residential parking is at 203 parking spaces, or a 0.7 parking ratio. And there are 33 parking spaces associated with the retail. The bike parking is consistent with the county's standard, providing 116 Class 1 spaces for residents in the residential building, for an additional 4 spaces to support the retail operations at the ground floor, 23 bicycle parking spaces in the G1 level of the garage for the hotel, and then at least 16 spaces around the site on the streetscape. I think the plans show at least 20 and maybe even more before we're done with the final plans. So one quick, going into some of the elements that were not discussed by the applicant are the streetscape and street design elements. All of the streetscapes proposed are consistent with the Clarendon sector plan recommendations for the area. One of the oddities of this block is that in order to achieve both urban tree canopy and on-street parking, we have to share the same space along Wilson Boulevard. And so the sector plan calls out for the provision of this. So there's generally a 19-foot wide streetscape that provides both tree planting and on-street parking interspersed while maintaining a minimum of a 12-foot wide or a 12-foot wide sidewalk, which supports a 4-foot size zone and an 8-foot wide clear sidewalk. So there can be additional ground floor activation. And I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. That was for Wilson Boulevard, and my slide is for 10th. 10th will have new street trees, an 8-foot wide clear sidewalk, and a 4-foot shy space. Additionally, North Irving Street is proposed to have new street trees, a 6-foot wide clear sidewalk, and a 4-foot shy zone. As we look at Wilson Boulevard, as I just discussed, there's a 19-foot wide streetscape with the 12-foot wide sidewalks. And to call your attention to something that we'll talk about in a moment, you'll see in these street cross sections that there's about 6 feet of additional space. That is not being forgotten. And so we'll get to that in a moment on the sort of north or west side of Wilson Boulevard, whatever direction you want to call that. And then finally, the new 10th Road, the new 10th Road North is going to provide a 6-foot wide clear sidewalk and room for street trees. There's generally a 55-foot building separation between the towers, both the Joyce Motors Tower and the residential tower and the hotel tower. Within that shared private alley, there's space for a travel lane in each direction and a 5-foot wide sidewalk up against the building edges. It's really important that both the Joyce Motor project and this project coordinate on this. And in doing so, they really have resulted in some very elegant transportation solutions that has freed up the real sort of pedestrian spaces along Wilson Boulevard and 10th Street or 10th Road, and then also North Irving to be a place that we can return to pedestrians rather than vehicles as part of the plan. There's only one little hiccup right now that staff and the applicant are working out, and that's the materiality of 10th Road North. Throughout the process, there's been a discussion of maybe a VUNERF, where this is more of a standard neighborhood street with 2 travel lanes and sidewalks and street trees here. That's consistent with the sector plan design, but the materiality of 10th Street is going to be elevated with a concrete surface, or either a concrete surface or a paver surface. Staff is recommending a concrete surface because of the utility vaults that were approved associated with the Joyce Motors project. So we want to make sure that those 2 projects have work well and the street functions well with a uniform material. So we're recommending a concrete, possibly with a stamp or colored finish that we can work out in the post-approval process. But this will be a very people-focused space with a nice building-to-building separation and the associated street trees within the streetscape. So getting back to that 6 feet, the additional 6 feet that the realignment of Wilson Boulevard creates, the county recommends and the applicant has agreed that the applicant, as part of their community benefits, will build out or widen this space. That will dovetail with Arlington County's project work at 10th and Wilson Boulevard, which plans to underground those area utilities there. And so there'll be about a 4 to 6 foot widening of the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. And if you're, I'm sure all of you have walked this at some point, it is very tight and very unpleasant. So widening the sidewalk here and removing the aerial utilities will go a long way to helping transform this part of the Clarendon neighborhood. One of the elements that we'll work through in the post-approval process is we'll want to explore if it's possible to put in street trees in this 4-foot zone. So maintain an 8-foot wide clear sidewalk and a 4-foot wide planting strip. That may not be possible because of utility conflicts, so we haven't required that, but we will endeavor with the applicant to explore the addition of street trees within this streetscape. One last element of the community benefits package is the open space at the end of North Irving Street. Today, DES has already closed this connection of North Irving Street to the Clarendon Circle and currently has a buyer retention area in there. Consistent with the Clarendon sector plan, this project will go through a county-led design process for an expanded public space within here, and the applicant agrees to build out the resulting design with the project. And so with that, that's the majority of the project. I'm going to go into, I hope I go into the, there we go, the vacations portion of the hearing. Very briefly, there are 2 sets of vacation areas that are proposed. These are existing alleys to serve the existing buildings on the site. The vacation of them will support the redevelopment of the site, which will ultimately deliver the new streets that we've talked about in conformance with the Clarendon sector plan and the county's master transportation plan. And with that in mind, I'm not going to read this because I will not get it right, but we recommend that you find that those vacations are in conformance with the comprehensive plan, including the master transportation plan. And then furthermore, we recommend that you recommend to the county board approval of the site plan and its associated conditions. And thank you.
All right, thank you very much. This is now with the commission. Commissioners, if you have questions here at the beginning, please go ahead and throw your hands up, whether virtual or in person, and we'll start working through anything we got here. Go ahead, Commissioner Furman.
Thank you for the presentation. One question I had was on the newly proposed 10th Road North. Will it be possible to take left-hand turns traveling west on that road onto Wilson Boulevard, or will that be a right turn only?
We are recommending a right in, right out for that maneuver.
Okay, yeah, I was concerned that that could be a safety issue with no light. And then I think I know the answer to this given the comment about the widening of the sidewalk, but was any consideration given to extending the bike lanes down Wilson Boulevard for the portion that you're widening?
Well, go ahead, Rob. Is this live? Can you hear me? Yeah. I would just say we followed the guidance of the county and the sector plan in terms of where we put things and the like. I think the notion was that this was an appropriate place for bike lanes and that there was a different route that the county wanted to see. And so that's what we did. That's what we provided.
Thank you.
Who's next? Commissioner Moravec, go ahead.
Is that on? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you're applying for a lower parking ratio, and I think that's commendable. But the 0.7 ratio in a place that has a walk score of 93, 7 minutes walk to 2 metro stations, pretty much everything you could imagine accomplishing in one day within walking distance. I mean, it seems pretty high, especially since some sites, I think the record is 0.3 or 0.39, something like that. I mean, 0.7, I'm wondering how you arrived at that ratio. I'm knowing full well that parking does cost a lot, so I'm sure you have your logic for it. I mean, it is a cost for you to add that.
Yeah, so it is a fine line, right? Do you provide enough? Do you provide too much? How do you kind of find that middle ground? I believe our number is literally almost exactly what Joyce Motors provided next door.
Yeah.
And to my recollection, they had a 0.7 as well, but that's to memory. But I think we want to make sure we have enough parking. The residential building is farther away from the metro, then you have to sort of walk the full length of the site to get to the metro and the like. And so I think there's some consideration to that. I think also just analysis of the market and what the developer, my client here, feels is the right number for this site. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. It really is a incredibly difficult decision as a developer, because these parking spaces are very expensive to build. In an ideal world, we'd have no parking spaces, but we'd also then have no tenants. It's difficult to come up with the, I don't know that anybody really knows what the right number is. COVID has been a real interesting experience for us because metro ridership is way down, and people are now living in their and working in their apartments and not in the offices, we know. So if we could, we'd do less. Mm-hmm. But then the neighbors, who we have pretty good relationships with, they don't want cars parking on the streets. And so it's just an amazing balancing act. And as we all know, you never have perfect information when you're trying to make the right decisions. I wish I could tell you specifically. So we did a survey of what our competition is doing, mm-hmm. and basically plugged our number in based on the best available information we've got. It's a very expensive decision. It's a very expensive project. We're hoping we get it right. That's all I can say. I mean, it's not a science, it's an art trying to get these numbers right. If you get it wrong, it's a costly mistake. Yeah. So. And
all of the parking is below ground, correct? Like there's nothing at grade or any podium type stuff.
Yes, yes it is. Yeah. Just the parking's below grade.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I hope we get it right. That's all I can say.
Awesome. Just I wanted to piggyback on that and say you wouldn't have zero tenants. There are plenty of buildings in the DC area that have zero parking and still have tenants. I personally think you'll regret that third level, even if it's only half a building. But I'm not gonna tell you your business. Other commissioner questions? Commissioner Lantelmi.
It's not so much a question, but I do want to appreciate the number of EV spaces and especially the number of EV ready spaces. We're constantly harping on, do you have enough EV given what's coming up? That you're building that in from the start is great. I'd like to see more of that from the projects that come before us. So you got right as far as I'm concerned. So thank you.
Commissioner Locker.
I had a quick question back to the slide with along Wilson Boulevard and the 6-foot sidewalk on the northwestern side. Could you just explain the sequencing of the road work that will happen when that portion of the sidewalk with the undergrounding and all of the other changes will occur in conjunction with the development?
Let me see if I can share that image again. I have to get out of. Okay. So the county's project is slated to begin next fiscal year, so the beginning of fiscal year 24. No, 25. Thank you. And so, what we're hoping to do is get the utilities undergrounded before they get into construction, but they have to build their new edge of the street on the opposite side before that sidewalk can get widened. Otherwise, the street would get narrowed beyond its functioning width. So we're technically realigning this, and so the sequence would be, in an ideal world, the county executes our improvements at the Wilson Boulevard and 10th intersection, undergrounds those utilities while these guys are, let's say, digging the hole or getting further permitting and whatnot. The county's undergrounded the utilities, then they can come back in and begin the construction at their site, and then pull the existing curb edge back and establish the new sidewalk and wider street width in a temporary phase, and then ultimately build the wider sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. Does that track?
I just had one more question, and I think this goes for all of the streets, but just keeping the pedestrian during construction. What will be closed during construction? So where can pedestrians walk during? On which side? Just trying to understand that. As in several of these projects around the county, you end up having to walk like around two city blocks in order to get to where you're going, rather than going directly.
So we endeavor to keep as much of the sidewalk open as possible while ensuring both safety for the people building the building and the pedestrians. I wish I could promise you that I had a absolute firm answer on this. The very tight nature of the opposite side of Wilson Boulevard, I would not be surprised if we have to close that sidewalk for at least the demo of those buildings. But we're going to try to endeavor to keep everything open. It's also going to get very complicated over here because in an ideal world, the Joyce Motors project is also under construction concurrently. So the county and both construction teams will have to do some very extensive and in-depth coordination to maintain those pedestrian routes, because we agree they are critical in this area.
So along Wilson, at least one sidewalk will be open for pedestrians.
At least one sidewalk will be open, and I would not personally like that one sidewalk to be the one we're looking at here, but we understand the challenges here.
Great, thank you.
Cool. I have what I think are a bunch of very quick clarifying questions. 10th Road North will be a public street, correct?
10th Road North will be a public street with an easement. We will not have fee ownership because of the garage.
The parking garage is under it. Yes. Okay.
And because of that, the maintenance of 10th Road North will be the responsibility of the projects.
Gotcha. Did I see when I was looking at the parking garage plans that there are potentially knockout panels to join this garage with the Joyce Motors project? Yes. Okay. Thank you. There is an existing bus stop within the project limits on Wilson Boulevard. Will that be improved as part of this streetscape?
Yes.
Does it get a shelter?
I don't think so.
Not enough ridership?
I honestly, I came in this a little late, so
okay.
I'm going to have to ask for some forgiveness.
No worries.
My understanding of the plans, it does not include a shelter, but it does include a full-length boarding area, improved ADA, detectable warning areas, and most likely a concrete pad in the street to help make sure that the buses don't push up the asphalt.
Great. And then I will finally, I will beat my dead horse with you, Rob. Did the county consider a mid-block crossing of Wilson Boulevard between here at, well, actually it wouldn't really be mid-block because 10th Road is coming. Is a crosswalk across Wilson Boulevard at 10th Road been considered by the county?
I believe it has been considered definitely through the process. I don't think that this is the first time this has been raised. And I think part of this is seeing what ultimately happens on the other side of this site. If and when that redevelops and there's a better sort of nexus for people to cross. Otherwise, it is still pretty close to the circle, which is already a very complicated vehicular set of movements. So not as part of this project, but not, I think that the county can and does go back and reevaluate those sorts of things in course.
Great. Commissioner Lynn, tell me.
Yeah, I'm going to add on to what he just said. Actually, the mid-block crossing, I think it is in the Clarendon sector plan update because that is something we specifically raised. And because of that, I think it was put in there. Across the street, you're not going to be seeing much redevelopment because one is the Dominion substation and the other buildings are preserved. They will not be redeveloped because as part of other developments, I think they were preserved as part of TDRs. And they're on the historic, the register for the county. So you're not really going to be seeing redevelopment there. We may have different uses and it may allow people to walk through the block, which is one of the reasons we were really strongly urging that mid-block crossing. And I'm pretty sure it survived into the Clarendon sector plan update, at least the provision that could happen. So this isn't the first time it's coming up. It came up when we went through this whole process, what, a year or two ago. The other thing, changing subjects, this is going to be another thing you're going to hear from me constantly about is having a bus shelter. I really don't like the usage. It doesn't justify one. This is a chicken egg thing. Partly people don't use the bus because there's no shelter. This is a very dense corridor. A lot more people are going to be living here because it isn't just this project. It's also all the other projects that are going on right around there. Bus usage has to go up just because the number of people there that aren't there today. So I would want to almost have by default, when we improve a bus stop, it have a shelter added to it, especially in this corridor, but you're also going to hear about PLD coming up, Plan Langston Boulevard. So, that's my editorial comment. And you'll hear from this and you'll hear from others probably about this going forward for other projects. But there really should be bus shelters. That should be the default. Thank
you. Commissioner Theo, on the internets.
Yes, virtually. I would also stress the need for the bus shelter on Wilson Boulevard and also the mid-block crosswalk, as has been mentioned. I do have a question about the bus stops on Wilson as they currently are. Where will they be relocated to, if at all, during construction?
Sorry, confusing devices, which one to unmute. I do not have an answer for where it would be relocated to. I suspect, given the level of construction on this site and the nature of some of this, it would either be relocated to the corner closest to Clarendon Circle, which at that point becomes an operational question of should it be there or should people cross to the shelters and stops just on the other side. So I think our transit team would have to do some analysis on the benefits of the overall network of stops during construction to look at the best outcomes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out a thing. Who else? Commissioner Terry, go ahead.
I would just like to add my voice to the need for the mid-block crossing. I know our goals are to ensure the safe transportation of people here in all that we do. And of course, there's a desirable coffee shop right across from these places and those residents and the residential building in this development and also Joyce Motors development. I think the quickest way they're going to get there is go through that 10th Road space and then cross Wilson right there. So just encourage you to really think about adding that mid-block crossing at that space.
Anybody else? Back to Commissioner Theo.
Yes, another quick question, hopefully quick anyway. Regarding the parking underneath the residential and hotel, taking into account what was said earlier by the developers that the 0.7 and the 0.35, they don't want to risk going any lower than that for the underground parking garage. Would it be technically feasible to convert part of those parking spaces into like public accessible parking? Would there be anything like that? Would there be anything technically preventing that from happening in the future if it turns out that is excessive parking for the residents and for the users of the hotel, to turn it into more of a commercial, or at least part of it into a commercial, publicly accessible parking garage?
So the site plan would not have any provisions that would require it to be publicly accessible. So it'd have to come down to a business decision about the economics of renting those spaces. But what I would like to just encourage the applicant and form the commission. The process between now and construction, there is still time. And if the applicant's business decisions and their analysis support a lower parking ratio in between that, our process does permit a new county board amendment to the project to bring it forward with a lower ratio, and the past track record and the sentiments of the commission would suggest that might be something supported at the appropriate time.
I just want to note that right across the street, or just across from the street from you, the Red Top Cab site, the new residents there, after the county approved the site plan, which went through this process, prior to construction, they petitioned and were successful in being granted the elimination of one level of parking under that residence. They went back and redid their numbers and said, we don't need that much anymore. And one entire level was eliminated from the project. So there is precedent for that.
I can tell you that we have on Garfield Park right down 10th Street from here. We've built to 1 1/8. We found that we do have excess parking, and we do make that parking available to the public. So the answer is a simple, practical matter. If it's there, we want to fill it. And our first priority, of course, would be to our tenants and then our guests at the hotel. And if there is additional parking, we will fill it as we have done. That's a given. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more, I think, straightforward question. Do you happen to have either of you, illustration that just shows where the residential entrance is for the residential building? The pedestrian entrance, like the front door. Trying to decipher where that is off of the actual 4.1 plans is not my favorite thing in the whole world.
And to elaborate on your question, you'd like the main entrance and any other
where are the
entrances?
Where are the residential main floor entrances to the residential building? Right on Wilson. Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's right there on Wilson. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not.
Yep, I sure can. Awesome. Thank you so much. Any other commissioner questions or comments at this point? Feel free to express yourself in any way. All right, let's start. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Moravec.
Yeah, with that entrance right on Wilson, will there be any mitigations potentially to take into account Ubers waiting out there clogging up the road? Like I could see that as an issue of people coming in and out, unloading stuff. Like I know you have like a loading bay, but people don't always want to set the time or to come in through the loading bay, so they'll try to do something quickly from the street.
You thinking about the residential?
Yes, the residential building with the entrance right on Wilson. Because there's not a place for like a car to pull in, there's no curb cut there, which I think is a good thing, but.
There are almost
There is?
4 on-street parking spaces
Oh, there are,
that
okay.
will be cut into the streetscape. And those should support just the uses you were discussing.
So are those going to be just designated as PUDO or actual parking spots?
So as I say, most times, what we do in the site plan process is try to maximize that amount of curb space for the county over time to ensure that it's best managed for a changing environment. So I think that it would be pick up and drop off, though there could be some handicap parking or sort of 2-hour parking or other uses as determined by the county over time.
All right, thank you.
But typically at a spot like that, they will make it, 15-minute or whatever it is that we put on top of what we want people to use for just pickup and drop off. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get the county manager's recommendation on the floor here, and then we can go from there. So to kick things off, I will scroll to the top of this massive board report, and I will move that the Transportation Commission recommends that the county board approve the attached ordinance for the Bingham Center site plan as outlined in our draft board report dated September 23rd, 2023. And furthermore, that the Transportation Commission finds that the ordinances of vacation that are outlined in our draft board report dated August 23rd, 2023 are substantially in accord with the comprehensive plan, including the master transportation plan of Arlington County.
Second.
All right, so that is the county manager's recommendation. Is there any discussion of that motion? I have a thing, which is that I would like to amend that motion. I will move to amend that to say, furthermore, that the Transportation Commission recommends that county staff continue to evaluate a safe pedestrian crossing of Wilson Boulevard at 10th Road North.
Second.
And that is seconded. I think we've discussed this already. I don't have a whole lot to say about it other than I think if we really think that people are going to walk out of that residential building, walk all the way down to Clarendon Circle in order to cross in the crosswalk in order to get to Northside Social, you haven't seen people in Clarendon or really anywhere. I just think it's not realistic. I think we're going to see a big uptick in jaywalking if we don't make some additional provision for people to safely cross Wilson Boulevard in this area. And we don't get a whole lot of opportunities to do it because, as Commissioner Lantelmi said, nothing's really going to change across the street unless we do it because it's two historic buildings and a Dominion substation. So I just want to keep that on the county's radar as we go forward, hence the motion. Is there any other discussion of the motion? Oh, wait, we have to vote on the motion to amend the motion, and then we can vote on the entire motion. Is there any discussion on my motion to amend? Is the applicant wanting to say something in response to this? It's not really aimed at you. It's aimed at the county. You guys?
Are you opening to me? I would say we'd be more than welcome to open that discussion to staff, but I also think it's a good idea.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your support. What were you saying, Mr. Gibson? Yes, my motion was seconded by Commissioner Lantelmi. All right, so at this point, we will vote, unless somebody else has anything to say, on the motion to amend, and then we will have presumably an amended motion upon which to vote. So this is solely on my motion to add the bit about the 10th Road crossing of Wilson Boulevard to the main motion. Commissioner Coleman.
Aye.
Commissioner Furman.
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Locker.
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Maradovic.
Aye.
Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon.
Aye.
Commissioner Terry.
Aye.
Commissioner Theo.
Aye.
And I too will vote yes. So now we have the county manager's recommendation as amended by the motion that we just adopted, 12-0. Is there any discussion on this motion as amended? Seeing none, we will go to a vote. Commissioner Coleman.
Aye.
Commissioner Furman.
Aye.
Commissioner Hussein.
Aye.
Commissioner Lantelmi.
Aye.
Commissioner Locker.
Aye.
Commissioner Ludlow.
Aye.
Commissioner Maradovic.
Aye.
Commissioner Yeri.
Aye.
Commissioner Shannon.
Aye.
Commissioner Terry.
Aye.
Commissioner Theo.
Aye.
And I too will vote yes. So that motion as amended passes 12-0. Thank you very much to the applicant and to staff for a both efficient and excellent presentation. I look forward to seeing Wilson Boulevard transformed, and I appreciate all your work in doing so.
Thank you very much.
I would like to say I've been doing this in front of the county since about 1980, and these projects are always challenging, but I genuinely believe they always are better because of the citizens' participation. So thank you all up there for spending your time and being your commitment to the community. So many thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, I think no, we're doing great. All right, we'll move right on to the next agenda item, Ms. Obukoya.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the Langston Boulevard Area Plan, and it is an information item in advance of a request to advertise. And I will introduce staff member Kristen Calkins to introduce everyone else.
Hi, everyone. I don't think Natasha has had the opportunity to join us yet. She's double booked in public meetings this evening on Langston Boulevard. So I am going to introduce Ryan, who is our consultant with AECom, who's been the lead for, a lot of the work. If you've been to a public meeting, you've probably seen Ryan before. So I am going to hand it off to Ryan to give the presentation.
Thank you, Kristen. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. All right, can everyone see okay?
Looks great.
Thank you. So good evening. We're going to kind of walk through a series of slides that reintroduce this planning effort to you and talk about how we got to where we are today and some of the high level overview of the transportation recommendations that are in the draft plan. So as you will remember, this planning process, this portion of it began in 2019, and over a series of stages and with significant public input along the way, we have come to be able to publish a draft plan earlier this summer, moving towards the final plan and adoption later this year. Once that draft plan was put forward in July, there was a significant online engagement response to it that were being folded into the plan as we speak. Draft 2, that request to advertise, is being prepared this month. There are other commission briefings happening this month as well, some of which this week. And the idea is for the RTA, for the Planning Commission and the County Board hearings in October with adoption in November. The vision, which was crafted through that public engagement, is to boldly plan for people and power of place by 2050, with the corridor becoming resilient, renewable, and re-energized. The draft plan envisions sustainability and environmental resilience and equity at its foundation, and reflecting a sustainable and equitable approach to land use planning, in concert, very importantly, with proximity to transit and the existing activity centers to reduce travel times and reduce emissions. A key portion of this goal, too, is to meet housing needs of increasingly diverse residents and household types within the county. Arlington's population overall is less racially diverse and younger and more affluent than the larger Washington, D.C. region. And within that, the Langston Boulevard corridor has a lower percentage of residents of color, it's more affluent, and it's slightly older than the county as a whole. The draft plan includes commitments to advancing racial equity, and through the county's equity lens, understands where and whether racial inequities exist and are being created or exacerbated, and evaluates the potential benefits and burdens of promoting change, and includes recommendations to mitigate or minimize those burdens for future and current residents, transportation being a key piece of that. The built environment for the corridor is diverse along the 5.5 miles. It's primarily characterized, though, by low-rise commercial uses, large surface-level parking lots, and pockets of multifamily and residential projects along the way, surrounded by lower-density residential housing. Those commercial areas are, in many cases, decades old. And lack the energy efficient features or extensive impervious coverage that we would like to change. The corridor does lack the mixed use development necessary to create a walkable Main Street environment. And the current housing mix provides limited opportunities for lower or middle income households to live or stay. The recent by right and use permit development has resulted in limited to no pedestrian friendly improvements. And it's one of the main reasons we think this plan is so important. Along the corridor, there are many different types or many different cross sections for Langston Boulevard from west to east. It is highly car oriented, as we've said, but that takes different forms. In almost all cases, there are at least 2 lanes in each direction, but there are very few street trees, and the pedestrian environment is narrow and immediately adjacent to that roadway. The farther east you get, the more and more like an expressway, actually, Langston Boulevard gets. And there are significant other challenges regarding flooding and other issues that need to be addressed as well. You can kind of get a sense in these images of some of the challenges from a pedestrianization standpoint or from a bicycling standpoint, but we also have great models to learn from, such as Westmoreland Street as well, where there are planned areas where redevelopment has occurred and brings buildings closer to the street, wider sidewalks, healthy street tree canopy, and the ability for activated uses like outdoor eating areas and street trees. So the corridor has challenges, but it also has examples to look to within it for the future. The residential streets surrounding Langston Boulevard are usually quite generally pleasant, great examples of high quality neighborhoods. But there are certain places, though, where the connectivity for pedestrians and other modes is severely lacking. Throughout the process, we identified several opportunities to remove barriers or bring new connections into the public realm network, both east to west, parallel and along Langston Boulevard, and of course across it and connecting to it from north to south. An important characterization here is that from an impervious coverage standpoint, the existing conditions, especially within what's called the core area immediately adjacent to Langston Boulevard, are highly impervious and a condition that we don't see changing dramatically without new redevelopment. There's conversely almost no tree canopy in many cases. The trees that exist are fortunately right now in those lovely neighborhoods just to the north and south, but not within that core area. And as mentioned earlier, there's significant flood-related resilience challenges along the corridor. Langston Boulevard itself, in many cases, runs along the ridge line. So in those cases, there's the opportunity to slow water down and detain it farther up in the watershed, making things safer for downstream residents. There's also opportunities where drainage crosses Langston Boulevard to provide for a series of overland relief corridors and places for that water to move safely. So also quite important to think about the potential for change and some of the challenges that come from maintaining the status quo, such as the expansion of those impervious surfaces and increased downstream flooding, the fragmented streetscape and the portions of the corridor that could remain unsafe for pedestrians, impacts or the hindrance to new housing supply, and of course, greater costs and more time needed, fewer strategic public-private partnership opportunities to attain that stormwater detention, unless we can make changes through redevelopment. So the draft plan guides these improvements and decisions for new buildings, site improvements, and other infrastructure, and it emphasizes development that can transform Langston Boulevard into a more walkable, sustainable, and urban Main Street, and help realize those county goals, including affordable housing, biophilia, safety, transportation, public space, and racial equity. So there are several different categories of policies and recommendations for topics within the built environment and the public realm. These have been kind of through lines throughout the entire process, and they're all interrelated to each other. There are also a combination of design principles and guidelines in the draft plan that provide high-level guidance for new development centered around promoting biophilia, social connections, placemaking, and neighborhood identity. And then there's the guidelines that go with them, and they determine how we can apply those design principles to achieve recommendations. And so these are guidance for both the people who are doing the creating the applicants, the plans, the landowners in the future, but also to future county staff in responding to those applications. Again, the design guidelines do not seek to create a uniform approach to architecture or the public realm, but to maintain the eclectic character and presence of several styles, several types of spaces, materials, and forms throughout. Very important is the key goals that were derived through consultation with the community. Throughout that engagement process, all of the recommendations that are in the draft plan are kind of in service of transforming Langston Boulevard into a more of a complete street, connecting the surrounding neighborhood areas to the boulevard, to that main street, and increasing transit use. And this goal informed the transit policies and recommendations throughout the plan. And we're going to kind of talk through that in greater specifics in the next few slides. So within the plan, the transportation policies are broken down into sections or that relate to the transportation network, the complete streets goals, pedestrian and bicycle facilities, transit, and parking. Within these sections, there are policies for creating those complete streets, including dedicated facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists separate from the roadway. And the policies speak to expanding the bicycle network, improving the circulation and safety for all modes, and studying some of the complex intersections that we have, and enhancing transit on the corridor in several ways, and promoting varying parking strategies. The plan also identifies several strategic actions and strategies necessary to achieve the vision and the policies that are laid out. Many strategies are going to involve close coordination with VDOT, as they do on Langston Boulevard, and many strategies are going to involve other county agency property owners, and again, VDOT for implementation. Following the most recent round of public feedback, DES also plans to add an additional action to the list to conduct detailed transportation analyses of the Area 5 cross-section recommendations, so the areas east of I-66 and Spout Run. There are a series of corridor-wide and neighborhood-specific transportation network maps throughout the plan, and they provide a framework for where new investments in the corridor are needed to enhance safety, mobility, and access for pedestrians, transit riders, and drivers. And these recommendations were identified through technical analysis that we did back when we were doing the preliminary concept plan process, and they've been refined based on community input and staff review. And so the more details on these are found in the plan and in the next few slides. So several intersection studies will be done by applicants in coordination with the county, and will focus on identifying improvements in intersections for all modes. The county may initiate some of these intersection studies at locations unlikely to see private investment as well. Streets are included in each area to enhance circulation and access for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. And these locations are included in each area map, but will be designed and finalized through site plan applications. So in some cases, you'll see new connections being made, but it will be up to those applicants and landowners to suggest the specific routing for those streets. So for example, in Area 2, what we're looking at here, a new grid is most crucial on the north side of Langston Boulevard, recommended between North Jefferson Street, North Greenbrier, and between North Dickerson Street and North Culpeper. These connections allow for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers to cross North Harrison Street and avoid the key intersection there. Let's see, Langston Boulevard from North Sycamore Street to North Lexington Street has limited right-of-way and is not planned for redevelopment in the same way that the remainder of the street is. So considering this, bicycle facilities are not recommended for this corridor. In those cases, we focused on bicycle improvements in the parallel network on 26th and 22nd. Now, east of North Lexington Street, the right-of-way is similarly limited. However, the land use recommendations involve significant redevelopment, where we have the opportunity for those recommendations to incorporate bicycle facilities along the corridor. But the plan does recognize that additional space will be needed. And so there's a series of setbacks associated along the right-of-way in order to facilitate the pedestrian space and the separated bicycle facilities. So as we move farther east into Area 3, again, additional intersection studies will be done. The streets that are located here that are most critical are in the expansion is east of North Woodstock Street, with the plan adding new east-west streets in this multifamily area where the large blocks exist to improve access to the planned and existing activity hubs at the Heights and in Cherrydale, respectively, and to minimize local traffic directly feeding onto Cherry Hill Road and Langston Boulevard. West of Woodrow Street, is it recommended to study whether a segment of Cherry Hill Road can be closed to create a public plaza and a gathering space that's been requested. And this closure would need to be analyzed with any of the potential modifications made to the intersection at Old Dominion Drive and Langston Boulevard. The land use and the right-of-way context changes significantly throughout Area 3, and there are 4 cross-sections recommended based on that in this area alone that all adapt to specific conditions north and south of the street. But they all include dedicated space for bicyclists. From North Glebe to Lorcum, there is enough development potential to expand the right-of-way to provide those facilities. And from Lorcum to Military, there's potential to reallocate existing right-of-way between the curves to accommodate dedicated bike facilities. And again, moving farther east, the intersection studies, again, will be really important for determining the specific changes at key moments for safety east-west and north-south. And there are significant new streets suggested connecting west to east through this area. Area 5 has a significant number of cul-de-sacs in a way that mean that people cannot move east-west without coming all the way out to Langston Boulevard. And from the very beginning, there's been an intent to find ways to connect between those streets for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. And it's most important between Spout Run Parkway and North Highlands, providing an alternative route to access Langston Boulevard and south and Spout Run. In Area 5 West, there is a significant right-of-way along Langston Boulevard to provide enhanced bicycle lanes without the need for redevelopment. And the conversion of the cross-section to include those enhanced bike lanes in place of vehicles would require definitely some significant transportation analysis along with VDOT. And following the feedback that we heard from the community in the most recent rounds of engagement, the intersections of North Quinn Street and North Oak Street will be added to the plan for future analysis. And in this location, there are no new recommendations for the bicycle network in Area 5 East. And lastly, the design guidelines in the draft plan are most helpful for understanding the kind of character to be created along the streetscapes and different ways that each of those streetscapes can work dimensionally, and how the separation of different circulation modes can work. And that's just in very specific sections of Langston Boulevard and in the cross streets. And then there are also guidance for how to handle the transformation of some of the blocks to become more walkable. And that's both where the architecture, where new buildings can be located, but also how curb cuts can be reduced to create a more cohesive streetscape, and how parking can be oriented, even in cases where there's not wholesale redevelopment, how parking can be at the surface can be articulated in a way that still maintains a pedestrian-oriented streetscape. And I believe that with that, we can go back to any part you want, but I think those are the main portions of our presentation for today.
Thank you very much. Ms. Obukoye, I believe we have a couple of speakers on this item.
We do. First, we have Jason Schwartz, and he's joined virtually.
All right, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Hi, so my name is Jason Schwartz, and I live 15 minutes walk to Langston Boulevard, and I'm just going to talk about Area 5 because I think it's really important to consider the context of which Area 5 is in. So first of all, Area 5 is, really centrally located to the Roslyn-Ballston corridor. It's practically, it is really along the metro corridor. And one thing to consider is that WMATA is right now in the process of upgrading the Roslyn bottleneck station with up to 20, 30, 40 billion dollars of total investment. So it's really, really important that the transportation and context of this area, especially in the North Highland section, which is 8 minutes walk. The Air Force site is 8 minutes walk to Roslyn Station. That this area really be tailored to this. I mean, they're going to be dropping in billions of dollars of tunnel boring and station expansion. So it's very important to keep that context. The second thing is to understand that the traffic along Langston on this corridor in Area 5 it's at the lowest point it's ever been in the history. As I submitted in the just quick slides that I sent in, the traffic is below 1975 levels. And that was pre-COVID, and post-COVID, it's even lower. So definitely a huge lane reduction is definitely warranted, and need to make sure that micromobility is incorporated into this area, especially in relation to the metro stations. I mean, this is not 1975 where there was no such thing as electric scooters or other micromobility. So especially where there's a lot of the highest intensity development, there needs to be safe corridors for people to access the metro and then hop on a bike share or get on a scooter or whatever to make their last half-mile trip to access where the high density buildings are going to be on Kirkwood. So it's very, very important that we have that north-south connection to really integrate the corridor, because again, this is a prime TOD metro. It should be treated as a metro corridor because it is practically right there. You look at DC with what they're doing at Buzzard Point, that is further away from the metro than this section is, and yet they're doing much more intensive development. So there's a lot more room for growth here. Need to consider WMATA's billions and billions of dollars of investment and make sure that the transportation feeds in and matches that investment that is coming for the region over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz.
Next, we have Mr. Joe Taylor, joined in person.
Step right up.
Page 25 of his presentation up?
Sure.
Because I'd like to talk about it a little bit. That's Area 5 West.
So,
I would also like to congratulate.
Before you start, I just need to ask Ryan to bring that up.
Sure.
Okay.
I will do so.
Oh,
Your
I
time
thought you-
hasn't started yet.
Okay, I thought you had
Should
it
I?
in yours.
All right. And
raise it up. Oh.
okay, and you said, I think it was slide 25?
Yeah, page 25. Yeah.
I believe that's Area 5 West recommendations.
Area 5 West. Congratulations to the new member of the board, and congratulations to those who got sort of promotions, I guess. And thanks for volunteering your service. I know the pay isn't that much, is it? I'd like to talk about this. There's a lot of things to like about the Langston Boulevard plan, including the improved walkway and path along the Langston Boulevard. But one of the things that really is bothering a lot of people is that that new cross-town throughway that you can see at the top of that football-shaped thing there. That would take about 5 acres of concrete or asphalt to cover that. 4 or 5 acres, depending on which of these new east-west things you're counting there. And that's about 4 or 5 times the size of the park that we have in that area. There are 3,100 people living there, and we don't need another 5 acres of asphalt there. We need some more parks. This has been an issue. All of the questionnaires and input that we've had in the past, there's been a lot of questions about where you want a bike lane here and a bike lane there on each block and so forth. Never any questioned whether we want a new throughway through this part of the neighborhood here. And I live near Mom's there, and yes, we could use another bike path and some pedestrian areas through there, but we don't need another road. I can walk from one end to the other in about 5 minutes. So, one of the reasons that was given in the latest plan was that people that might be in an activity over at the new Land Village Shopping Center might want to go over to the drive over to the park. But drive over to the park, there's no parking there. Why not just walk over? So put some bike paths in there where that line is, but not another road. Also, it runs right through 2 affordable housing units. 97 people live. Okay. And also, there's no cost estimate for this. You know that the Department of Transportation says that every preliminary plan, and this is way beyond a preliminary plan, ought to have a preliminary cost estimate.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Commissioner Lantelmy, did you want to get your thing out of the way here?
Sure. I am, in addition to being a transportation commissioner, I'm also president of the Langston Boulevard Alliance. So this is something that the Alliance has been working with the county and the stakeholders up and down the corridor for the past 10 years. I am here tonight as a transportation commissioner. Any comments that I make are my personal comments as a commissioner, and they may or may not align with the views of the Langston Boulevard Alliance. The Alliance is preparing written comments, which will be circulated to all the county commissions, county board members, and the neighborhood associations and other stakeholders in the coming weeks. That said, as I just want to reiterate, and I have checked with the county attorney. This is not a conflict of interest. So again, my opinions tonight are my own. Thank you.
All right, great. Time to get I have an entire page of questions for staff. I'm going to jump right in, but other commissioners feel free to throw your hands up, and I will bounce around so that I don't monopolize a bunch of time. I think one of the biggest opportunities here is, of course, the actual transformation of Langston Boulevard, the roadway itself. And I think it's one of the greatest possible community benefits of the plan. My concern is whether can we get there? Is it achievable? How do we get from where we are today through the plan to a rebuilt Langston Boulevard, at least from Lexington east, even if not west of Lexington. I think it will be very straightforward to get additional right-of-way from some, major developments in the nodes that are outlined in this plan. But I'm very interested in the consultant and staff's view on the feasibility of actually achieving a rebuilt Langston Boulevard, at least from Lexington east, if not from end to end, given maybe less likely redevelopment in other portions of the corridor.
I'll take that one. So, two-part answer. For the segment Area 5, we feel that we can, as the county, come in and do a capital project and build that segment. It will obviously take a significant amount of transportation analysis in coordination with VDOT, a significant amount of capital investment from the county in order to transform from about Spout Run Parkway to Beach, the 3 lanes in each direction, to the 2 vehicular travel lanes in each direction with enhanced bike facilities and wide sidewalks. For the rest of the corridor, there's the opportunity from about Lorcum Lane to Glebe Military to possibly reallocate the right-of-way curb to curb by narrowing the travel lanes and putting in bike lanes. Again, we'll need to coordinate with VDOT. The concrete median would need to be removed. You would have to do kind of a mild reconstruction of the roadway there in order to fit the bike lanes in. For the rest of the corridor, though, we do have to have redevelopment happen, and it will take time, and it is a long-term vision for the redevelopment of the corridor, and it's not something that we anticipate will be done in the next 4 or 5 years. We might get long block faces for like 3 or 4 blocks where we're going to be able to implement the cross sections. But there will be times where we're going to have to wait until redevelopment happens because we do need right of way from these parcels in order to realize the vision.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. I think my concern is really in some of these stretches between nodes west of Glebe. There's kind of a node at Harrison Street. There's a node, I think, at Glebe, but in the interim, the proposed maximum heights are relatively low. What do we think is the actual economic feasibility of somebody deciding to redevelop under the plan, given the limited height available to them and that they would need to provide land to the county to potentially rebuild Langston Boulevard in order to get just that small amount of additional height?
I'll ask Ryan to answer that question.
Sure. No, it is a very good point, and one that we've talked about quite a bit. I think that the answer to your question is has to do with lot consolidation, right? There, west of Glebe, between Glebe and Lexington, let's say, there are relatively few larger lots. Those lots are mostly clustered near the Harrison intersection. So there's a sort of a lot of smaller properties, which do hinder the ability to put together a coherent streetscape transformation. So the trick will be how many lots can be aggregated together to create a project that has the right economic viability. There have been quite a few discussions with neighborhoods on both sides of Langston about those heights. It's been a particular location of where heights are of great interest. They're an important topic across all of Langston Boulevard, but in certain places it's very important to the neighborhoods. That is certainly one of them in Area 2 there. So the question of economic feasibility is really a question of how many lots can we realistically aggregate at one time in order to create a viable project. At the same time, there were discussions about extending the heights at key locations and maybe a few more nodes. And the community has provided really strong feedback on those ideas. So again, trying to find a balance between the mass of future development and the needs of the community that exists today.
Thank you. I'm going to bounce it to Commissioner Theo, who has his hand up.
Yes, regarding the Zone 5 West that was spoken earlier and or brought up earlier, including the new east-west corridor, east-west primary street that is being proposed. What are the potential options for that to look like? I know on the map it was listed as a primary or as a proposed or potential primary road. What does that look like, and what other alternatives are there for something that's a little more asphalt and concrete, or a little less asphalt and concrete heavy? For example, is there something similar to the Pentagon City Sector Plan Greenway that is part of that plan? Is that an option?
So let me answer the question kind of on what the vision for that street is. It's not supposed to be a major thoroughfare. It's really meant to be an east-west connector for the buildings that develop along that area between 66 and Langston Boulevard. We don't want every single person to have to either walk, bike, or drive down to Langston Boulevard in order to access Kirkwood and Spout Run. What we want is a little bit more trip distribution. The intent behind that street is really one travel lane in each direction, sidewalks and development on either side to allow for circulation through that area. Right now, it is really landlocked. I think Ryan mentioned when he talked about that slide that it is just a lot of dead ends. If you're walking through there or biking through there or driving through there right now, every single time you want to get somewhere within that community, you end up having to come back to Langston Boulevard. And the intent behind that east-west connection is to allow for people to move east-west locally in that area without having to drive onto, walk onto, bike onto Langston Boulevard. And we do think, even from a vehicular perspective, that that is really important, that people can travel east-west if they're living in these neighborhoods and not have to take every single trip on Langston Boulevard. So we really do think that it, as a connective tissue for that community for all modes, is very important.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
To
your
also,
point, Kristen. Oh, sorry, good.
I would just also direct Commissioner Theo to page 133 of the draft plan, which has potential cross sections for new primary and secondary circulation streets. Commissioner Lantelmi, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, I've also walked that site, and I also hosted some of the walking tours of that Area 5 West. And we heard tonight from one resident there opposed to it, and a number of the people on the walking tours were opposed, made similar arguments. But there were also a number of people on those walking tours who said, gee, I really would like to have some alternative way to get over towards Spout Run or to the park in the other direction, because we really hate walking on Langston Boulevard because the sidewalks are narrow, the cars go very fast, it never feels safe. I just would rather have something quieter and easier to get east-west on. My question for Ms. Culkin is, should this go to the GLUP, be put on the GLUP map, would we actually be prescribing where they go specifically, or will we do striping like we've done in Virginia Square, where it just says we will have additional streets in here to be determined as development occurs, rather than prescribing it has to go here, here, or here?
So great question. And that's actually something we've talked about internally. We're planning on doing something very similar to the most recent Pentagon City Sector Plan, where we put areas for intended streets on the map, but we do not articulate explicitly where those streets are, so that as site plans come in and we have the opportunity to design connections, that we do them based on the guidance of the plan, but that they're not so specifically articulated on the map that we don't have the flexibility in the future to build them where they make sense in that time and place.
great, because part of it is, again, when I've walked that, where we have one of the streets potentially to go, there's such a huge topography change that maybe an electric bike would work, but it isn't going to work for cars or people, and it certainly isn't ADA compliant. So we really do need that flexibility. It isn't just North Highlands; it also the other areas of the boulevard where we're proposing additional streets. Thank you. We really should have that flexibility in there to as development comes in. We're not sure what form it would take, and we can't have we should be open for creativity in how these things are done. So thank you very much for that.
Great. I think my next question, since I'm not seeing anybody else shoot their, oh wait, Commissioner Coleman's got his hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I just wanted to see if you could give me a little bit more information about how through your plan you're intending on separating, breaking down some of these separating barriers for people being able to reach public schools. So of course, Langston Boulevard serves as a major barrier between north-south and people getting to not just public schools, but other public facilities and other amenities. And so as a way to integrate these different communities, I just want to see if you could explain this a little bit more.
Sure. So one of the policies in the plan is to enhance additional pedestrian crossings for Langston Boulevard. Right now, the only safe places to cross as a pedestrian are where you have signalized intersections. One of our policies is, as redevelopment's happening, to look for additional opportunities to create safe pedestrian crossings of Langston Boulevard. I think one of the biggest things is just the transformation of the corridor itself. The reason why Langston Boulevard is a barrier today is because of Langston Boulevard's current context and character. As Langston Boulevard redevelops, as we get mixed use development along it, there's people who live on Langston Boulevard, literally on Langston Boulevard. There's people who are walking, who are shopping on a regular basis. As we see that cross section begin to evolve, as these intersections are redesigned through redevelopment, the corridor itself will become more friendly to pedestrians. It won't be that barrier anymore. It'll just be a piece of kind of your walk, maybe more like Fairfax or Wilson are in Ballston. Today, over time, it won't seem like a barrier to cross because it's just part of your experience getting to a place, be it an elementary school, be it a park, be it the grocery store, as you're living your daily life.
All right, thank you.
Oh, I got one too. As long as we're talking about pedestrian crossings of Langston Boulevard, let's talk about transportation and connectivity policy number 9 in the draft plan, which says improve pedestrian and cyclist crossings of Langston Boulevard with protected crossings where appropriate and seek opportunities to minimize the distance between marked pedestrian crossings. How do we decide where it's appropriate? I hate that phrase.
Guidance in the MTP.
Say more.
So I don't want to get into detail, but the idea is that we will, through these studies that we're doing in the future, through site plan applications, take a look at where pedestrian crossings are, maybe to your earlier comment on the Clarendon sector plan and the fact that in the Clarendon sector plan, you pushed for a pedestrian crossing in specific locations, that as we go through and do more detailed analyses of specific locations of different segments of the corridor, we're going to be looking at the opportunity and the ability for pedestrians to cross the corridor comfortably.
I would just advocate in the interest of making this a more resident readable plan and something that people can take away something meaningful from. I would love to see us move in a direction on policies like this to like a kind of level of service or a metric, right? Something that says that our goal is that no pedestrian crossing Langston Boulevard has to go more than 200 feet out of their desired path in order to get to a safe crossing, or something like that. Some things people can look at and be like, oh, well, that would be way better. Right now I have to go like way further than that just to get down to the next safe crossing of Langston Boulevard. I just find this kind of plannery where appropriate language doesn't say anything to anybody. It just says maybe there's going to be more, but maybe there's not, because maybe it's not appropriate anywhere. So I would love to see us get to that kind of language that actually speaks to an average person. Commissioner Lantelmi, I think you wanted to jump in on this too?
Yeah, one of the things we have heard from the community consistently, and every community along the entire corridor, is that they feel intimidated in crossing Langston Boulevard. It just always feels unsafe. And there are long stretches where there are no traffic lights. And other, such as between the Heidelberg and George Mason, with a bottom of a hill, cars keep speeding up to get to that bottom crossing there. You also have a number of intersections that do have traffic lights, but are engineered so poorly that you still, it's just a pedestrian nightmare, such as, the Spout Run, Langston Boulevard, Kirkwood intersection, which is a continuing problem and is terrible. And I walk across it, and I hate walking across it. We have others that are similar. So it's a combination of traffic signals, striping, and total re-engineering of a number of these crossings that are going to be very necessary. Even if people aren't crossing now, the reason they're not crossing is because they hate crossing and they don't want to. They're going to get killed if they do. So it's, this is another chicken egg thing. You can't say we can't do this. It's not a priority because nobody wants to do it. It's because people can't do it or won't do it. And that's why we have to really be looking at these to make them as walkable and think of pedestrian more than thinking of getting traffic going through it. So thank you.
Other commissioner questions or comments? All right, I'm jumping back in. How does leaving, talk to me about Cherrydale and the fact that it's got its existing plan and we didn't really talk about Cherrydale in this plan because it has its existing plan. Can we still get, a rebuilt Langston Boulevard through Cherrydale despite the fact that we left Cherrydale alone in here?
I'm going to toss that one to Natasha because that was a planning process decision.
Yes, hi everyone. Apologies that I'm late. I had another meeting that I had to be there in person and then come here. So to answer that question, it's really a two-part question or two-part answer. We did look specifically at the cross-section for Cherrydale. I know that ACOM did a number of studies earlier on in the process when we were looking at the land use scenarios and then later in the preliminary concept plan that really spoke to very specific, let's say, but obviously to the level of detail that we could provide at that time. It was still very high level, but it did make some, very, I think, robust recommendations for improvements to the 5-point intersection, to the overall cross-section of Langston in that segment, and not just Cherrydale, but also for East Falls Church. We do think that transportation, like public spaces, it's a corridor-wide element that we need to make sure there's cohesiveness and coordination. The challenge that we ran when we were looking at that particular issue, when it came down to the transportation, is that the land use recommendations, or at least the policies that are in place in the plan now for Cherrydale in particular, didn't really support the level of redevelopment that we would need to encourage the sort of the changes along Langston Boulevard, in the way that we are applying it everywhere else along the corridor. So if you look at the rest of the corridor, there are places where, again, we're showing up to 5 stories, up to 7 stories, up to 10, and so forth. It recognizes that it needs a level of height and some more tools, incentives to be able to encourage, like, Ryan was saying, consolidation of lots, which is really what we need to reduce the number of driveways and then do everything else that comes along with that in terms of the streetscape improvements. So all that to say, we haven't forgotten about it. It's very much top of mind that it is an important piece to come back to. Again, we didn't do it because we felt that the plan, we needed to go back and have more conversations with the community. At that point, I don't know that we got a lot of support from everyone in that particular community or in that neighborhood area to say, yes, it's time to change the plan. Yes, it's time to relook at heights or even some of the land use policies and recommendations that would support the kind of transportation changes. So we didn't want to just rush it and not take the time to really discuss it with the public and with the community there in particular. But it is on our list of things that we want to come back to. We just don't have yet, as you know, it's not in our work plan. It needs to be assigned to our work plan. And, hopefully that will that will become a priority after this plan is adopted.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Commissioner Theo, I see your hand up. I think that's a new up, not an old up.
Correct, it is a new up. With Langston Boulevard being a state-owned route, what challenges does that pose for Plan Langston Boulevard, whether, especially when it comes to transportation kind of issues of realigning lanes, narrowing lanes, adding in bike lanes, that sort of thing? Is VDOT on board, and or we have some sort of agreement or process with them built up that we can make this easy? Or would it ultimately be much easier for us if Arlington County was to somehow obtain ownership of Langston Boulevard in the future?
So VDOT has been a partner in this process since its initiation. They've reviewed everything we've done thus far. They reviewed the transportation analysis that happened as part of the PCP. They were actually at a number of our listening sessions with the community in July. They have not told us no on any of our cross sections. What they have said is that we're going to have to coordinate with them. Any, future physical changes that we go in and make, we're going to have to do analysis for. The point that we made with the section 5, area 5 cross section. If we want to implement that, it will require significant transportation analysis, like detailed analysis. We've done the high level work. We think it can work, but we're going to have to get really kind of in the weeds with VDOT. We're going to have to do a transportation study. We're going to have them approve it. They're going to have to sign off on it. But we're committed to doing that work with VDOT in the long term. There are a lot of opportunities at these intersections that VDOT's also, on board with to help align them to be safer for all modes. VDOT is really enthusiastic about the idea of reducing the number of curb cuts along Langston Boulevard. I think that's probably one of the things that they might see as one of the biggest benefits, is that safety and operational perspective of there's curb cuts so often on Langston Boulevard right now that it's just a safety issue for pedestrians, for drivers, for really anybody who's walking, biking, moving, scooting along the corridor. We're gonna have to do our due diligence, and we're gonna have to coordinate with them. But that's something that we would have to do no matter what for Langston Boulevard. I'll say it is part of the national highway system. It's part of VDOT's network, and we'll just be committed to working with them as we work to realize Langston Boulevard.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Mradovic.
Hi. The schools are mentioned a lot in the draft, but not in the transportation section. And I know it's kind of implied that on that, what is it, TC1, that says, like basically a multimodal corridor. But what do you think about making it more explicit of providing alternatives for students to get to school, even though it is implied? Because as we see, there's so many school bus driver shortages. And speaking from personal experience and the experience of many of my classmates, I know when I moved to a neighborhood where I could walk to school, it was incredibly liberating and fun. And I think that would be a great goal to strive for in this corridor, even though it is kind of implicitly implied. So just your comment on that.
It is implied. I think one of the things that we did is we didn't really get into the weeds on like school walk sheds and things along those lines. I think there is that higher level implicity that we're doing this to benefit all people who move. We didn't call it the people who are specifically walking to the grocery store or walking to parks. Just because there is that high level implicit that by doing this, we are improving people who are walking and biking to any type of trip.
Other commissioner questions or comments? All right, this is just an info item. It will be back to us for action in the future. I think we've learned, Commissioner Ludlow, jump right in.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of applaud this effort. Langston Boulevard is a relic of the past, and it is time to do something with it. Long past. I use the corridor frequently as a bicycle commuter and sometimes as a rider of Art 55. My main concern is about how to hasten change on the corridor. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions there. One of them is, how dependent are we upon property assembly and kind of the movement of the private markets in terms of really realizing the change along the corridor? And is there a way we could catalyze it more quickly? And then I have a follow-up question to that question.
I'll let Natasha take that one because it's pretty development driven.
Sure. I think we've said this before, but the opportunities for changes are going to be very much nodal at major intersections where we see the most opportunity for either consolidation because there's more height or because properties are larger. It really varies along the corridor. This isn't as we know, the corridor isn't composed of, let's say, similarly sized blocks for the whole entire 4.5 miles. We've got topography changes. We've got blocks that are very short and narrow and some that are very deep and irregular in shape. And at the end of the day, it really has to do with what sites are ready to move forward the quickest. And what we know based on, who we've talked to and who's shared information about, their plans for the future is we know that there's definitely more interest in the nodes around those intersections. And so we think that that's going to be the catalyst that's hopefully going to start the interest, which is important. At least it happens in those nodes. And that's where the county has an opportunity to come in and invest in a more localized way, which hopefully will then continue to grow.
Okay, so my second question is related, and that is, how closely have we looked at transformative change corridor? But I'm wondering, I mean, in many circumstances, it almost takes a public investment to really catalyze, especially those sections between nodes. So have we looked at what we can do within the right-of-way that is public, that's VDOT owned right now, that is not dependent upon the independent actions, but could be integrated into the market-driven forces along the corridor? Because I'm just, I think this could evolve in a very piecemeal way, and organic is nice sometimes, but it could take a very long time and you could have a lot of disjointedness. And I'm wondering whether there's a way to kind of make a lot of difference within the right-of-way along some strategic sections on a more accelerated basis, especially if some funding were found or a grant was obtained or something like that.
Kristen, you want to talk? I know you have very specific areas. Yeah.
Dog. A lot of this right-of-way is constrained. Money is not the big constraining factor, even though, financials are a constraining factor. For a significant amount of the corridor, without redevelopment, there's very little wiggle room to make improvements. And that's why the redevelopment of the corridor is so important over the long term. There are nodal opportunities to improve a lot of those major intersections that currently serve as barriers to safe pedestrian and bike access crossing the corridor, and even to some of those nodes from the neighborhood. And then, as we mentioned kind of earlier on in our conversation, in Area 5, we do think there's a real opportunity for us to come in and make significant change with capital investment to the corridor, and then some opportunities in Area 3. But just from a right-of-way perspective, it's a constrained corridor, and that's why the redevelopment and the opportunity to get space where we can enhance the sidewalks, create safe space for cyclists. And it also includes in some of that, all of it narrows the vehicular lanes as well. It's not just about, you know, expanding into the building envelope, but some of it does constrict the right of way, but we need both in order to make the change that will actually improve people's experiences.
And I would add, Kristen, that it's not just the space, it's changing the building placement.
Yeah.
The issue that we have is that for the most part, we've got parking lots with sometimes no buffer between the parking space and the sidewalk. And so unless the building can move closer to the street and we put the parking in the back and the access is off the side streets, it will be really hard, even if we had all the money in the world, to come in and do things consistently when we have to deal with site distance triangles, and then you can't place trees.
Curb cuts.
Yeah, because of those curb cuts. And so we were putting money into something that isn't going to do anything. I think we've talked about this before, where wherever we've had some intervention along Langston, wherever we've done some improvements, it's really been marginal.
Yeah.
And we've seen it even with the by right development. Like, for example, this is why we don't want by right development for the most part. You know, we saw it with the children's school. Well, it's a great facility and it's something, it's a need and it's a service that the community really wants. There was a lot that could have been done if they would have had more tools at their disposal. We weren't able to get street trees. In that particular site, we have 2 curb cuts so close to each other. And it's practically parking on the ground floor. There's really nothing activating the street and you know, generating pedestrian activity. So it's those missed opportunities. We really need to encourage that redevelopment just to be able to change the building, the site configuration.
Yeah, I mean, I think the part that's the most ripe for a transformative reimagining is between Roslyn and Cherrydale, where you have that is a massive footprint already. Anyway, thanks for your insights. This is going to be tricky and multifaceted and dependent on a lot of different actors, and is going to take decades to be realized, I think.
Great. Commissioner Lantelli?
Hi, I just have a couple of points. One we haven't talked about yet is transit. I'd like the plan to have in it 10-minute headways for the buses along up and down the corridor, and pay more attention to the cross Langston Boulevard buses, so there really is true transit connectivity rather than what we have now where it's basically a half hour between buses, which really isn't transit. So put that down. Parking, especially in areas 2 and 3, and I think you've alluded to this, so I think it will be in the plan, but I just want to emphasize that that it's not the metro corridors where we're really tight on where parking can be done and should be done, or should not be done, more importantly. Here, this is still going to remain to a certain extent auto-oriented. Those retailers will need parking. It has to be designed right, but we shouldn't out of hand reject surface parking, for example, if it's in the back, hidden away, or on the side somewhere with very narrow. Definitely get rid of curb cuts, but at the same time, be able to preserve the ability of people north of the Langston Boulevard, especially to be able to access the retailers. That's their lifeblood. So we need to preserve within the plan that flexibility, design flexibility for parking, and look at different things, as long as the buildings are up against the street, which is what we all want, and it doesn't interfere with pedestrians. But it's also not a metro corridor. So thank you.
Great. I think we're heading towards a wrap up here. I think we've heard a lot of really useful information and explored a lot of good topics. I continue to be focused primarily on making sure that we can actually rebuild Langston Boulevard from end to end in a way that is an enjoyable place to walk and a safe place to bike, and where you can easily and low stressedly cross Langston Boulevard. And I continue to be concerned that there is not enough to encourage the redevelopment that we have heard so eloquently is absolutely required in order to make Langston Boulevard not the auto-centric pedestrian Frogger place that it is today. So I think it is imperative on us as a commission, as this comes back for action in the future, to be prepared to make recommendations to the county board about how the plan can make sure that it is sufficiently incentivizing redevelopment so that it is economically viable, so that staff is added to their work plan to come back and talk about Cherrydale. So we don't have a Cherrydale revitalization district sized hole in our rebuilt Langston Boulevard, smack in the middle. And so that we can actually get to a more livable and enjoyable Langston Boulevard. Anybody else have any final thoughts before we wrap this item up?
If I could just give a quick update on timeline, perhaps my team already did, but if you allow me.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to make sure, perhaps the team already mentioned it in the speaking points at the beginning. We are aiming for RTA in October and then final adoption in November. So the plan at the moment is we may or may not come back to all of the commissions. We're doing sort of the round robin now in the month of September to make sure we've hit everyone before we release the official first draft, which is going to be the RTA draft later this month. So at the end of September, that draft is going to come out. You will see some, I think, good improvements addressing a lot of the things that you mentioned tonight. But I would encourage the commission, if this is something that you support, you know, maybe all of the statements that you just said, feel free to submit a letter to us stating all of the comments that you've had, and let us know if you feel that after we've addressed the issues and we release the RTA draft, if you still think that there are things that are missing, to let us know as well. And then, you know, if we need to come back and readdress something, we're happy to do so. I just want to let you know that we're really pressed for time. And so I don't want to wait. If there are, you know, comments already that you have, we would be happy to start processing those before we go too far into the RTA.
All right, I'll see what I can do. That's not normally the way that we operate, but I'll figure something out. We'll coordinate through Ms. Obukoye. All right, thank you very much. I think that closes out this agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes all of the items on the agenda. Now we can move to other business.
I don't have anything else other than our next meeting is coming right up.
September 28th.
September 28th, one of our closest together sets of TC meetings. That is technically our October meeting. And we need to provide a representative and an alternate to the River House site plan review. So if that is something that you are interested in, please shoot me an email sometime soon so that I can work through whoever's interested and we can get a couple names on that list before it gets into operation. That's right there in Pentagon City, across from what used to be Pentagon Row and is now named something much more bland and difficult to remember, West something. Anything else? Oh, Commissioner Theo, I see a hand up.
I was just going to say on the delegate or alternate for River House, I could be interested in that, so I'll reach out to you.
All right, cool. I'll toss your name in the hat with whoever else reaches out. Anything else for the good of the order? All right, then we are adjourned.